Unpopular opinion. A lot of the time, I actually prefer to play D&D on a virtual tabletop. VTTs make visual aids infinitely easier to create and to use during your game, especially dungeon maps. And free graphic arts programs like Krita mean that you can make simple maps in a matter of minutes, regardless of your artistic ability. In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to get started making your very own dungeon maps in Krita. But first, know that this video is intended to be a foundational primer. There's a lot more that you can do to make beautiful, evocative maps, and certainly a lot more to learn about Krita than I'm going to be able to cover in this video. And I'm by no means a professional graphic artist, but I am going to walk you through a few basic steps so that you can start making simple dungeon maps right away. First things first, you'll need to download Krita. If you haven't already, I've put a link in the description to this video. The program's free and I don't get anything for promoting them. I'm just a fan of how easy it makes digital map making. Once you have Krita downloaded, go ahead and open up the program and we need to create a new image. So we're either going to go to this new image button here under Start, or we're going to go to File and click New. Either way, we're going to get this dialog box that pops up. And it's going to let us make a number of changes to our upcoming project, specifically picking the size of our canvas. Now there's a bunch of predefined sizes here, and you can choose the one that fits you best. I usually go with this US letter 300 ppi because that's the size of a typical sheet of graph paper. 300 ppi, or pixels per inch, is the standard resolution for most images as well, and when you're working in a virtual tabletop, you don't need anything that's a higher resolution than that. In fact, higher resolutions are going to be bigger file sizes, which means they're going to download more slowly on the other end, meaning that your players are going to experience a delay when they open up maps with a higher resolution. Now, that being said, if you're designing something for print, something you plan on blowing up, or something you really want to dig down deep into the details on, a higher resolution like 600 might be appropriate. Next, we're going to check the color, and we want specifically to have this RGB/alpha model, because RGB is the color model that your computer screen uses, meaning that the colors are going to show up the cleanest on a virtual tabletop. So then we're going to go to Create here, and that's going to give us our blank canvas. Now, the first thing that I want to do is create a set of grid on here so that I have an idea of the scaling and sizing of everything I'm putting down. That way I don't have to go back later and hope and pray that I have everything in proportion. Now there's two ways to do that. If you just want an overlay grid, one that won't export with the final file, then using the grid and guides application out of Krita here is an easy way to just kind of throw a grid of any size you want up over your page. And this is a really good option if you're working on a virtual tabletop that allows you to overlay a grid. For example, Fantasy Grounds will let you do that when you're uploading maps. That being said, you may also end up in a situation where you want to export a grid as part of the image. I do that a lot, and so we're going to go over how to do that as well. But first, let's go over the grids and guides. So if you don't have this little panel up open on your Krita yet, all you're going to do is go over to Settings. You're going to go down to Dockers. You're going to come down here to Grids and Guides and just make sure you check that box. So to show the grid, we'll click Show Grid, and then we'll adjust the size. For this, let's make a pretty large grid. We're going to say it's going to be 100 pixels by 100 pixels. So we get a good solid size here. That means that you're going to effectively have each one of these squares is going to be a third of an inch, right? Because we had 300 pixels per inch. So this is how we can get a rectangle grid, but we can also do isometric as well. So if we want to do isometric maps, we could swap the type to isometric, and we can still adjust the cell spacing. Again, let's do 100 here. And then you'll notice we get these diamond patterns, but that they're not quite in perspective, meaning they're not quite ready to use for an isometric map. To fix that, we change the angles from 45 to 30. And then look at that. Voila, we get a nice grid that's viable for isometric maps. So if you prefer that kind of thing, you can do that in here as well. Now, For this and for my personal preference, I like a grid that I can export, which means that I'm going to go ahead and close this grids and guides Docker because I'm not going to need it. And instead, I'm going to rename the paint layer here to grid. And when you open a new document, you'll always open up a background and a paint layer. You want to work in that paint layer, really not touch the background when you can avoid it. We're going to name this one grid. We're going to pick a color. I like that blue, so I think we're going to stick with that. And then we're going to go over to the fill tool. We're going to click in the center of our, well, frankly, anywhere on our canvas, because we're going to fill the whole thing. And it doesn't matter what color you use, because we're going to fix that later. So once we have that filled up, we're going to go to our filters. We're going to click Start GMIC-QT. And then in the search bar, we're going to type grid. We want our Cartesian grid in this case, although you could theoretically do a hexagonal grid, so it might be suitable for regional maps, that kind of deal. But that's not really what we're focused on today. So we're going to do a Cartesian grid. And we're going to set the size. Let's stick with 100, because that's kind of what we're using for this example. But you can change that to anything you liked. And then we're going to hit Apply, and then OK. And voila, now we have these 100 pixel by 100 pixel squares. But, ooh, our background is a color and our grid is transparent. We want to change that. We want our grid to be a color and our background to be transparent so that we can draw images over it and under it and make it look seamless. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go back to Filter. We're going to click Adjust. Well, I guess scroll down to Adjust. And then go down to Color Adjustment Curves. We'll click on that. And then in this dialog box, we're going to click Create Filter Mask. And that's going to create a mask that's underneath this grid layer. We're going to right click on that. We're going to go to Properties. It's going to open up another dialog box. We're going to change the channel to alpha. And then all we're going to do is we're going to take this point, and we're going to invert them. Meaning this one is going to come up, all the way up, and this one's going to come all the way down. Meaning the input becomes 255 and the output becomes 0. And effectively what we've done is we've told this color adjustment layer to invert transparency and color on this grid layer, which gives us exactly what we're looking for, a colored grid and a transparent background. Perfect for us to get started on our next step, which is sketching out our dungeon. Okay, so now that we have our grid in place, we're ready to start sketching out our dungeon or our adventure location, whatever you're choosing to make. Now, our fill tool isn't appropriate for that, so we want a brush. In this case, we're going to come over to our brush tool, and we're going to pick some brush that works for us in the presets. I like to use a pencil. This Pencil 1 Sketch My Paint, I like. It just works for me, but you can use whatever feels good to you. And then we're going to pick a nice light color to work with. And we're going to pick a new layer. So we're going to go up to Grid. We're going to create a new layer with this plus icon. And we're going to rename that to Sketch. All right. We don't want to do any work on this grid layer. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and lock that temporarily so that I can't mess it up. Because we can go back and edit it later if we like. We can choose the color. We can do all kinds of stuff. But for right now, we want to work on a fresh layer that is independent of the others. And I'm choosing a light color here for my line work because I want to be able to draw over it later easily. But you can still use black and just change the opacity. Really do whatever feels best to you. I like how this feels and I like how this looks when I start putting in lines. So we're just going to draw out a simple dungeon here, and I think we're just going to start with some basic shapes, right? So we're just kind of filling in the basic vibe, the simple features of our dungeon space. Not trying to do super clean with the lines. We're just kind of playing around. We're experimenting. We're keeping it fast and light, and just seeing what we can come up with. So, through the magic of the mutable time-space continuum that is the internet, I'm going to go ahead and speed this up so you can kind of get the time lapse here. without listening to my chatter for the next 15, 20 minutes or whatever, however long this takes. So I will be right back when we get to the very end. Now that we have our sketch layer down, we're ready to start adding our more permanent line work. So we're just using this sketch as a guide as we go, and we're going to do all this work in an additional layer that goes over the sketch. And we're going to hit that plus icon. We're going to call this, we'll call this walls, because we'll probably have a couple different layers as we go through here. Working in layers allows you to isolate what you edit, making it really easy to do overlays on things. And for example, like laying doors over walls and then erasing that section of wall so the door looks nice and clean without affecting the door. So let's start with walls. If we find as we're doing this that our sketch layer is just a little too opaque, we can always dial down the transparency a little bit if we need to make it easier to see. But making sure we're on our wall layer, we're going to start by laying down the exterior kind of work here. We're going to pick another brush. I think I'm going to go with this Ink 4 Pen Rough. All these are included in the Krita download, so you should have these as well. I'm going to choose black for this, although you can go with any color you like, and you can even change it later. It's pretty simple to edit those colors as long as you're working within specific layers. And I think we want to dial up the line weight a little bit. Let's give ourselves, let's see how this looks. Let's see how a 10 looks. So we're going to come over, dial it up to 10 pixels. We're going to come over and move away from the brush tool because we're going to want some nice straight edges in places here. Instead, we're going to go to this polyline tool. And how this works is we're just going to kind of click along lines, and when we're ready to end it, we'll shift click the mouse and it'll draw the line permanently. So for example, I can zoom in and out with my scroll wheel, and I can just kind of line up here and click, and straight line click. Now we don't have to worry about too much accuracy on this. I mean, you can get really fanatical about this if you like, but it's an underground dungeon. Not all the walls are going to be plumb. Let's be honest. Click, click, click. And yeah, so let's do this as kind of a test and see how that looks. So we click there, shift click. Yeah, that line weight's pretty good. I could dial it up if I wanted it to be a little bit thicker. Really, you want to use line weight to your advantage when you're doing pieces like this. For example, line weight can be used to suggest height and depth on things. So I go back to my line tool, on my brush tool here. I can use my line weight to suggest depth along this ravine that I have driven here. So for example, the upper edge might be the same weight as the walls, and so I just kind of give it this rough, jagged feel to it, terminating on both ends, and draw there, kind of giving that in there. So if I do that, and that's the edge of my ravine, and that's floor level, and then I put in, walls here, ooh, that's difficult because now there isn't a clear distinction between the two. But if I, for example, made my walls a little thicker, like a 14. Let's go 15. Let's play on the wild side, right? And so made this wall like a cave wall kind of deal. All right, we have that. And then dropped my ravine level, my floor level weight down to 10. We can see that we get a more natural distinction between the two, one that is more intuitive to your players, that allows them to more easily read this map. Because our eyes naturally see things that are larger as closer to us and things that are smaller as farther away. So with that in mind, I think I'm going to change the line weight up here to a 15. And so I'm just going to erase these lines. You'll see since I'm working in a different layer, it only touches my ink here. It doesn't work. It doesn't affect my sketch. But I think I'm going to do some thicker lines for the walls, and then we'll do thinner lines for things that are lower. Floor level stuff. We'll do even thinner lines when we get down into the bottom of the ravine here. So with that in mind, I'm going to go through and go ahead and ink up the exterior here, and then we'll talk about tossing indoors. So stand by. So now that you have all of your line work down, we're going to go ahead and start adding in the doors. Now, if you look at this map, you might realize that there are a ton of doors, and getting all those the same size and shape by hand could be a real pain in the butt. So instead, we're going to create a stamp that allow us to just kind of point and click and add those doors wherever we need them to be in whatever direction we need them to be. To do that, we're going to create yet another layer, and we're going to name that one Doors. All right, so now in this layer, we're going to find some place where we want a door. And I'm panning just by holding the space bar. That'll give me this little hand tool, clicking and dragging. Okay, so I want a door in any place where the playable space connects to a different playable space, but there's a wall there, right? Pretty simple. So I'm envisioning these squares as 10 foot by 10 foot blocks. So these 100 pixel by 100 pixel blocks are 10 feet by 10 feet in terms of game terms. So I'm going to come over to our little rectangle tool here, and I'm going to adjust the size of my brush. I think we're going to go back up to a 7 on this, using the same rough ink pen I did before. And I'm just going to find a shape and size that I like, that I think looks good. And it kind of gives me what I'm looking for there. It gives me enough that the player's going to notice it, small enough it'll fit kind of in the center of any of these boxes. I think that looks good. Cool. So nice and simple. We're then going to turn off all of the other layers of our map. And we're going to take this rectangular selection tool, and we're going to create a box around that. Then we're going to come down here, and we're going to pick a pen that has the pixel engine associated with it. And I happen to know that the Stamp Sparkles has a pixel engine associated with it. And so we're going to come over to, we're going to select that, then we're going to come over to the edit brush settings up the top here. And we're going to verify we got the right brush with this pixel engine right here. Then For this one, we're going to get rid of the size and mirror. We don't need that. We're going to need brush tips. And then we are going to go to this predefined tab. We're going to come down here to stamp, and that's going to give us that. We're going to unclick create mask from color. We're going to call this our tutorial door. I'm going to say half 100 px, just so I know what I'm talking about, because I've made doors like this in other applications. So then I'm going to go ahead and click save, and this creates a temporary stamp, right? So we can go ahead and use this as is, but if we close Krita for any reason, we'll lose the stamp and we'll have to recreate it. So to prevent that from happening, we're going to save this as a new brush preset. So first things first, we're going to go ahead and give ourselves a little icon so that we can select it and find it more easily in our brush presets. Then we do that just by clicking on the scratch pad here. We're going to click Save New Brush Preset. We're going to click Load Scratch Pad Thumbnail, and then we're going to give it the same kind of name. So tutorial door half 100 px, or whatever you want to call yours, right? And we click Save, and we're good. Now we've got it in our brush presets, and that's perfect. We can use it however and as often as we like. Before we carry on, are you looking for fun, exciting adventures that you can drop into your campaign with ease? If so, check out my published adventures. They're the perfect solution when you need a kickstart for your campaign, a quick adventure to get you through tonight's session, or even just a weekend one-shot. Go to rjkerr.com to find all my content. Thanks for listening, and now back to the video. Now that we have our brush saved, instead of just going through and stamping this in willy-nilly wherever we need it, we're going to go ahead and create our next stamp. We're going to, just as before, we're going to go ahead and show all visible layers again. Now we're going to click deselect so that we can draw outside of that spot. Then we're going to come up back to our previous brush tool, so our inking brush, and we're going to pan down. And we're going to see that I've got a couple places in here where we have secret doors. So we're going to want to create a stamp for that as well. So to do that, I just have my doors page, or my doors layer selected, just as I did before, and I've got my brush. Now I'm just kind of giving myself a nice smooth S, and maybe I'm going to dial up the... Maybe I'll dial up the width of that a little bit just to give it a little more meat. And I'm drawing till I get something I like. Now, if you're having trouble making a smooth curve, I am using a tool option here. I'm using brush smoothing. Yours may be set on none or basic, pretty much the same thing. But you want to just go to this tool options tab, click stabilizer, adjust the sample count to whatever you like, unclick the delay. That's going to make it easier for you to draw with. It's going to feel less choppy. And you'll be able to get started with that. Now, you may also want to go to settings, go to configure Krita, and change this brush cursor icon to something other than no cursor, just to give yourself a little bit of feedback while you're drawing, so that you know where the brush tip is still moving from, because there's going to be a little lag when you use this smoothing tool. But we have this basic S that I like, works for what we want to do, and so let's go ahead and create a stamp from that. So same deal as before. We're going to go ahead and unselect all of these other layers. We're going to use our rectangular tool. We're going to create a square, well, a rectangle around this guy. Go back down to a brush that has what we're looking for. In this case, we're going to, again, use that sparkle stamps. Again, go to predefined, create a stamp. We're going to say, we're just going to say secret door. Secret door, half, Cool. We already have create mask from color unchecked, so we're good there, and save. Then we're going to clear out this thumbnail. We're going to paste this into the center. There we go. And that's kind of big, so let's clear that out. That's not going to do. We're just going to go ahead and readjust our size here down to something more manageable. Paste that in our center. Let's give ourselves a couple. Why not? Cool. And save new brush preset. Again, secret door half 100px. Load scratch pad thumbnail and hit save. Cool. So now we've got this door stamp, this secret door stamp available to us. So again, we're going to click out of here. Now we're going to go back and show all of our layers once again. And go back and deselect so that we can keep working in that door layer. All right, so now we can kind of get a little stamp happy, and we can start putting in those stamps wherever we see fit. Now, the size of this is probably out of scale here, so we want something closer to, get something we can kind of match up to this, right? Because this creates a scalable brush that we can resize to whatever purpose we need. So we just want something that's kind of the same. We're using, just kind of lining it up with our previous door, and now we're stamping it in place, seeing how it looks. It looks pretty good. Great. So since we're currently oriented in this vertical format, we're going to go ahead and take care of all the doors that have vertical placement and work our way through on that. And let's just kind of work our way down. So in the meantime, let's go ahead and hit a time lapse for this so that you can see this at speed instead of in real time. Okay, that looks good for all of our horizontal surfaces. So let's go ahead and flip our image. So we're going to go up to the image here. We're going to go rotate. We're going to say rotate image 90 degrees to the right. And now we're just going to repeat the same thing. So now that we have all of the doors stamps in place, we want to go through and clean these up a little bit, because these doors with the line through them don't look rad, let's be honest. There's two ways that we can do that. The first is we can simply come through and just select our wall layer and just erase out the center of these doors. And that gives you kind of a nice clean interior. You're still going to see the line of the grid through that. But it can also be a little bit tedious to do, although it gives it a cool feel. So instead, in this case, I think we're going to go with option 2. And for that, we're going to pick our fill tool. We're going to take our selector, we're going to bring that down to white, and we're going to select our door layer, importantly, and we're just going to fill, kind of work our way down through the whole map, cleaning these up by just filling them in with white. Entirely up to you what you want to do. Just depends on how much time you want to devote to this, how much energy. There's really no right or wrong answers here. Once we fill in all of our doors, we have a viable map. We can see if we hide this sketch layer, we have nice clean lines. We've got clear differentiated doors and chambers. This is something we could conceivably throw up on a virtual tabletop and play with. However, there's a few details that we can add to this to make it feel like a more professional map and really kind of zhuzh it up a little bit for our players and for ourselves. So that'll bring us to our next section, putting in all the details. Now that we have the basics of our map put in, we can add a few details to really make this pop on the page and make it a much nicer map to play off of. So to do that, we're going to tackle this in a couple different areas. First thing, we're going to talk about the creating a sense of depth in our cavern or our ravine here. So to do that, we're going to add a few little lines vertically. Again, I like to add a new layer for this kind of stuff, just so that if I make a mistake here, I can erase without worrying about damaging what's below. So new layer, let's go ahead and get back to a brush tool using our rough ink brush again. And I think we're going to go ahead and hit this up with, let's see here. This was a 10 to a 7 to a 5. So let's go with a 7 to start. And I've got 2 layers of lines here, meaning this is a kind of a deep ravine in my mind. And so we've got this first sort of upper layer, and then we have another strata of rock, and then we have the bottom, is how I visualize it. And we can read the depth visually because we've got thicker lines along the top, middling lines through the middle, and smaller lines through the bottom. And we're going to use the same kind of concept of line weight as we add a few sort of directional lines to give this a little more shape. So we're just going to come in here, and we're just going to, we're going to make sure that this is back on black, not on white. But we're going to come in here and we're just going to make a few little directional lines to really accentuate the shape of the rock here. And this takes a little bit of time, but effectively, I'm just adding a few lines here and there to give this rock some shape. Where it kind of curves out, the line base comes a little closer together. Where it curves sort of bowls, the line bases are a little farther apart. And just not putting a whole lot of thought into this, just kind of feeling it out as I go, adding just a little bit of movement here so it feels like there's a living rock face and not just a squiggly line. This is going to take a minute, so let's go ahead and jump back to our time warp. Now that we've added a sense of depth to our ravine element, we're going to do the same thing for the line art for our walls. Now, our walls don't need as much detail put into them. In fact, it's a waste of time to really draw out every section of the wall unless you're looking for a really high quality, polished, professional looking map, which frankly is not necessary for most of the maps in your games. But we still want to give them a sense of depth so that they feel like more than just a line on a page to ourselves and to our players. We're going to do this by adding shadow. So we're going to start by creating a new layer. We're going to name that shadow. And we are going to drag that underneath our doors just so that they continue to pop. We're going to dial the opacity down to about 25 for this. We're going to keep black as our color selected. And then we're going to pick a different pen tool. I think we're going to use our charcoal rock soft option here. I just like kind of the jagged quality that gives us. And then we are adding shadows selectively. What we don't want to do is just outline the whole room because that doesn't give us a sense of actual depth, right? It just appears as an outline and it doesn't really add much, doesn't really tell our eye that there's any height there, just extra color. Instead, what we want to do is we want to just pick out the walls that would be blocking the light. So if our light source came from this upper left, we're just looking to hit the top and leftmost walls in our dungeon. So that's going to give the room a little bit of depth, make it appear as though the walls are standing up and above the floor. So I'm going to go ahead and do this for the whole map, and we'll move into a time lapse so that you can see the process super quick, and then we can jump on to the next phase. Now that the shadow is laid out around our dungeon, we can see that we've got a better sense of depth for all the spaces here. Now, we're going to take steps to differentiate the actual rooms from just kind of the negative space that fills this dungeon, the places that the players, or the characters rather, can't physically go. So, to do that, we are going to create yet again another layer. So, we do that, and let's put this down as hashing. Now, there is a brush that I like to use for this, and that is this guy right here, the Screen Tone More, I think is how you pronounce it, because it's going to give you nice, clean hashing lines. Now, it comes as size 120 pixel, and you can just kind of test to see how that looks. Yeah, that fills that space pretty nicely. So we are going to do that all around the negative space to mark off the walls or the rooms from everything else. So as we fill this out, we're going to do this on all sides. We're just going to sketch around, adding a little bit of distinction to every section of our dungeon. So again, let's go ahead and get to our time lapse so we can see this move at hyper speed. And fantastic. Now we've got all that hashing around the negative space, really making the rooms feel very different from the non-playable areas of our map. The map's really starting to pop at this point, and that means that we're almost done. So the last step is to add a background. Now, you can go online and download, a parchment paper or canvas or sketchbook paper or lined notebook paper, whatever you want to do for that. Uh, in this case, I've gone ahead and downloaded some parchment background. So I've got that up my on my file explorer. I literally just grab it, drag it, drop, and I'm going to insert as a new layer. I'm going to click the transform layer icon here, and I'm just going to stretch that out into place. And I'm going to move that layer down below pretty much everything other than the background itself. Great. Now it looks like this has all been done on parchment. That's a little powerful for me, so I think I'm going to dial it back, the opacity back just a little bit, so we get some of that color, but it's not so overwhelming. You can play with that as you see fit. You can find one that isn't perhaps as yellow or as tan, and just save that to your computer somewhere and use it on every single map. Makes it nice and easy. But now I kind of want to play with this grid a little bit as well. So it doesn't need to be in all the negative space set here. I really just need it in the rooms, and that might also make this map look just a little bit cleaner. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our grid layer here, and actually our color adjustment layer, I think. Nope, going to be a grid layer. Gonna be a grid layer, I think. We're gonna go up and we're gonna make a hard brush our tool, like our basic one here. And we're gonna come in and, oh, we've got it locked. So let's unlock that. There we go. And we're just gonna come in and we're gonna dial up the size, I think, on this a little bit just to make it a little easier on ourselves. So let's get up to somewhere around 100. And we're just gonna erase out that grid. Now, the reason we're using a brush instead of an eraser on this is that since we've inverted the opacity, we've also inverted how the tools interact, right? So the brush on this inverted layer now acts as an eraser, and an eraser will act as a brush. So we're just going to kind of come through and just erase out those unnecessary lines. Excellent. And now we have a really clean, professional looking map. If we want to go a step farther and maybe add a little color to this, we could go in and color the grid a bit. Or we can make any other adjustments we want. We could spend some more time creating new layers and doodling some of the details in the rooms, boxes, beds, bookshelves, that kind of deal, statues. So you could really, double down and get into some of the detail in here if you like. Creating new stamps is necessary. But for the basics, this is really all that we need. We've got a visually readable, playable map that we could share on a virtual tabletop and run a dungeon off of. And that's really all you need to get started. So get out there and get mapping. I'd love to see what you create. Thanks again for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and be sure to hit that bell icon so that you never miss a video.